Welcome to Mr. Horror Man. Before we begin, if you find yourself looking over your shoulder tonight, hit that like button and subscribe. It lets me know you're brave enough for more. Tonight, we're diving into a story that might make you reconsider staying home alone this New Year's Eve. Most people spend New Year's Eve celebrating with friends, drinking, and waiting for the ball to drop. But while the rest of the world is looking at the clock, some people are looking out their windows and seeing something they can't explain. Tonight, I'm bringing you 3 allegedly true New Year's Eve horror stories that might make you want to keep the lights on until the sun comes up. Story 1. The Countdown Guest. New Year's Eve has always felt like a forced celebration to me. The pressure to have the best night ever, the overpriced drinks, the crowds of people you don't actually like, it was never my scene. In 2021, I decided I was done with it. I had just moved into a new apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brownstone in a quiet part of the city. The building was charming but had its quirks. Creaky floorboards, a manual radiator that clanked like a ghost in the pipes, and a balcony that overlooked a narrow, dimly lit alleyway. I was 24, working a grueling job in data entry, and all I wanted was silence. My plan was simple: a large pepperoni pizza, a 6-pack of beer, and a marathon of a show I'd been meaning to finish. No parties, no forced small talk, just me and the quiet transition into a new year. By 10 p.m., the city was already starting to hum. I could hear distant sirens and the muffled bass of a party 3 floors down. But in my unit, 3B, it was peaceful. I was slumped on my secondhand sofa, the blue light of the TV washing over the room, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I didn't think much of it, probably a Happy New Year mass text from my mom or a group chat. I leaned over and checked the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize. No area code, just a string of 6 digits. The message read, "I'm outside. Let me in." I snorted, thinking it was a prank. "Wrong number, buddy," I muttered to the empty room. I set the phone back down and went back to my show. But 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. "It's cold out here. The countdown is starting soon. Don't be rude." A small prickle of unease crawled up my spine. It wasn't the message itself. It was the timing. I looked at the clock, 10:15 p.m. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a neighbor was locked out. But why text me? I'd only lived there for 3 weeks. I didn't even know the names of the people across the hall. The street light. I stood up and walked to the front door. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the overhead fluorescent light. I checked the deadbolt. It was locked. Still feeling restless, I moved to the large bay window that faced the street. I lived on a one-way road lined with skeletal trees and parked cars. Across the street, there was a single flickering street light. Underneath that light, a figure was standing. They were tall, unusually tall, wearing a long, dark wool coat that reached their ankles. A wide-brimmed black hat was pulled low, casting a deep shadow over their face. They weren't moving. They weren't looking at their phone or waiting for a cab. Their body was angled directly toward my building, directly toward my window. I pulled the curtain shut, my heart hammering a sudden, erratic rhythm against my ribs. It's just a coincidence, I told myself. Some drunk guy waiting for an Uber. This is a city. People stand on corners all the time. But then the phone buzzed a 3rd time. I like those curtains. Blue was a good choice for the living room. My blood turned to ice. My curtains were navy blue. I hadn't opened them since I moved in until just now. Whoever was standing under that light had been watching me. They had seen me look out. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed, "Who is this? I'm calling the police." The reply came back instantly. "The police are busy tonight. Too many parties, too much noise. No one will hear you over the fireworks." The observation. I retreated to the kitchen, the farthest point from the window. I felt exposed, even with the curtains drawn. I started thinking about the layout of the building. The front door required a key fob. The back entrance was always locked. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I was safe. I tried to call my friend, Dave, but the call wouldn't go through. "Network busy," the screen said. It was New Year's Eve. The towers were likely jammed with thousands of people making calls at once. I felt a wave of isolation wash over me. I was in a building full of people, in a city of millions, but I was completely alone in that moment. 11 p.m. The radiator in the corner began to hiss and clank louder than usual. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the door that led to my small balcony. The balcony didn't have stairs. It was just a concrete slab with a black iron railing hanging 30 feet above the alleyway. Buzz. 11 p.m. 1 hour left. I'm moving closer. I bolted back to the front window and peeled the curtain back just a fraction of an inch. The space under the streetlight was empty. I scanned the sidewalk, the parked cars, the shadows between the buildings. Nothing. Then I looked directly down. The figure was standing on the sidewalk right beneath my window. They were looking straight up. Even with the hat blocking their features, I could see a flash of white. Teeth. They were smiling, a wide, fixed grin that looked too large for a human face. I backed away, tripping over my coffee table. I scrambled into my bedroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, gasping for air. Think, use your head, I told myself. Call 911. I dialed. The phone rang and rang and rang. Finally, an operator picked up. 911? What is your emergency? Yes, hi. There's a man stalking me. He's outside my apartment. He's sending me threatening texts. He knows what I'm wearing. Sir, please slow down. We have a high volume of calls tonight. Is he inside the building? No, but he's right outside my window. Suddenly, the line went dead. Not a hang-up, just silence. I looked at my phone. The signal bars had vanished. In their place was a small X. The tapping. 11:30 p.m. The apartment felt different now. The air felt heavy, like the atmospheric pressure had dropped right before a massive storm. I stayed in the bedroom, clutching a heavy glass lamp as a makeshift club. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the living room. I crept to the bedroom door and pressed my ear against the wood. The sound was rhythmic, methodical. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a fingernail hitting glass. My heart stopped. The only glass in the living room was the window and the sliding glass door to the balcony. I remembered. I'm on the 3rd floor. There were no trees near the balcony, no fire escape. It was a sheer brick wall. It was physically impossible for someone to be standing out there. I forced myself to open the bedroom door. I had to know. I crept into the hallway and looked into the dark living room. The TV was still on, muted, casting dancing shadows against the walls. The tapping continued. I looked toward the balcony door. The curtains were thin enough that the moonlight filtered through. I could see a silhouette, a tall, dark shape standing on the other side of the glass. The figure from the streetlight. How? How could he be standing on a 3rd-story ledge that was only 2 feet wide? My phone vibrated in my hand. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. It's a long way up. My fingers are sore. Let me in to warm up. 15 minutes left. I watched as the silhouette's hand pressed against the glass. The fingers were wrong. They were far too long, with too many knuckles curling against the pane like the legs of a spider. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was constricted by pure, primal terror. I backed into the kitchen and grabbed a steak knife from the drawer. My hands were shaking so hard, the knife clattered against the wood. 11:55 p.m. The muffled sounds of the world outside began to grow. People were cheering in the streets. I could hear the party downstairs reaching a fever pitch. 5 minutes, someone yelled. I was cornered in my own home. I looked at the balcony door. The figure was no longer tapping. It was leaning its head against the glass, peering in. I realized that the balcony door wasn't fully latched. I had opened it earlier in the day to let some smoke out of the oven, and I hadn't heard the click when I closed it. The figure began to slide the door. Scream. The sound of the metal track was the most horrifying thing I'd ever heard. It was slow, deliberate. He was savoring it. 11:58 p.m. "Go away," I screamed, my voice cracking. "I have a knife. I've called the police." The figure didn't stop. The door was halfway open now. A gust of freezing winter air rushed into the warm apartment, smelling of old, damp earth and something metallic, like blood. I saw his hand grip the edge of the doorframe. The skin was gray, pulled tight over bone, with long, yellowed nails. 11:59 p.m. I knew I couldn't stay. If I stayed, I was dead. I didn't care about my belongings. I didn't care about the cold. I bolted. I ran to the front door, flipped the deadbolt, and flew into the hallway. I didn't wait for the elevator. I hit the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my socks slipping on the polished wood. Behind me, from the top of the stairwell, I heard a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. It was a laugh. Not a human laugh. It sounded like a recording of a laugh, played at the wrong speed, distorted and mechanical. "Happy New Year," the voice boomed through the building. The midnight discovery. I burst out the front door and onto the street just as the clock hit 12. The sky erupted. Fireworks exploded in bursts of red, green, and gold. People were hugging and kissing on the sidewalks. Music was blasting from car windows. The world was celebrating. I ran until I hit a major intersection where a police cruiser was parked, its lights flashing to manage the crowd. I collapsed next to the car, sobbing, clutching the officer's arm. "Please," I gasped, "there's someone in my apartment. He climbed the wall. He's not human." The officers were skeptical, but they could see I was in genuine shock. They drove me back to the brownstone. We went up to the 3rd floor. The hallway was quiet. The door to 3B was wide open, just as I'd left it. The officers entered with their guns drawn. I waited in the hallway, my heart pounding. "Clear," one shouted. "Nobody here." I walked in, my legs feeling like jelly. The apartment was freezing. The balcony door was wide open, the curtains fluttering in the wind. There was no sign of the man, no footprints on the balcony, no marks on the brick wall outside. "Look, kid," the officer said, putting his hat back on. "It's New Year's. People get crazy. Maybe you had a bit too much to drink, or maybe it was a prank by some local kids with a ladder." "He didn't have a ladder," I whispered. I walked over to the couch to grab my phone. It was sitting exactly where I'd left it, but it was turned off. I powered it on. There were no texts from the 6-digit number. The log showed nothing but my outgoing calls to the police and Dave. My stomach did a slow flip. Was I losing my mind? Then I noticed a new notification. A photo had been taken at exactly 12 a.m. I opened the gallery. It was a selfie, but I wasn't in it. The photo was taken from the foot of my bed. It showed the empty room, the covers tossed aside, and in the reflection of the vanity mirror on the wall, you could see the photographer. It was the man in the black hat. He was standing in my bedroom, holding my phone. He had pulled his hat back just enough to show his face. He didn't have eyes, just smooth, pale skin where the socket should be. But his grin was wider than his face, stretching from ear to ear, filled with rows of needle-like teeth. And in his other hand, he was holding a single navy blue curtain ring. I moved out the next day. I didn't even pack my things. I hired a company to do it for me while I stayed in a hotel. I live in a high-rise now, on the 22nd floor. There are no balconies. But every year, when the countdown starts and the world begins to cheer, I turn off my phone, and I stay far, far away from the windows. Because I know he's still out there, and I know he still has my number. Outro. If that story made you check your balcony locks, let me know in the comments below. Have you ever had a wrong number text that felt a little too personal? I want to hear about it. Before you go, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Mr. Horror Man. We're building a community of brave here, and I don't want you to miss what's coming next. Be careful who you invite this year. The clock is ticking. I'm Mr. Horror Man, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe. Story 2. The Silent Neighborhood. Narration becomes slower, more deliberate. My grandmother was a woman of many superstitions. She was from the old country, a place where the woods were thick and the stories were thicker. Most of her warnings were harmless. Don't whistle indoors, don't leave your shoes upside down, never sweep the floor after sunset. But there was one rule she was dead serious about. Never sleep through the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, she would say, her eyes widening behind thick glasses. The new year is a doorway, Ilias. It opens for only 1 second. If you are awake, you walk through it with the rest of the world. But if you are asleep, you get left behind. You stay in the year that has already passed. And the things that live in the old don't like visitors. Growing up, I thought it was just a clever way to keep the kids from missing the celebration. It became a joke in our family. Even as an adult, I'd toast to not being left behind while sipping champagne. But last year, the joke stopped being funny. The double shift. December 31st, 2023. I was working as a junior resident at a metropolitan hospital. If you've ever worked in healthcare, you know that holidays aren't holidays. They are just days with more trauma cases and fewer staff. I had pulled a grueling 18-hour shift. By the time I punched out at 9:30 p.m., I wasn't just tired, I was vibrating with exhaustion. My bones felt like they were made of lead, and my brain was a fog of patient charts and beeping monitors. I drove home through a city that was already beginning to roar. People in glittery outfits were stumbling between bars, and the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and anticipation. When I finally reached my suburban neighborhood, it was quieter but still alive. My roommates, Sarah and Mike, were throwing a small get-together. When I walked through the door at 10 p.m., the house smelled of buffalo wing dip and cheap Prosecco. "Hey, the man of the hour," Mike shouted, holding up a red Solo cup. "Grab a drink, the countdown's in 2 hours." "I need 20 minutes, I mumbled, leaning against the doorframe. "Just 20 minutes of horizontal time. Wake me up at 11:30, okay?" "You got it, Elias," Sarah said, giving me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. "Don't let the old year catch you." I groaned at the reference and stumbled into my bedroom. I didn't even take off my scrubs. I fell on my bed, and the last thing I remembered was the distant sound of Taylor Swift playing on the living room speakers and the muffled laughter of my friends. The awakening. I woke up to an intense sensation of cold. It wasn't just a draft. It was a deep, biting chill that felt like it was coming from inside my own lungs. I sat up, shivering violently. The room was pitch black. My first thought was that the power had gone out. The hum of the space heater I usually kept on was gone. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up, blinding me for a second. 12:15 a.m. "Damn it, Mike," I whispered. They had forgotten to wake me up. Or maybe they tried and I was too dead to the world to hear them. I expected to hear the aftermath of the party, clinking glasses, maybe some late-night Netflix, or the low murmur of Sarah and Mike cleaning up. But there was nothing. The silence was absolute. It wasn't the quiet of a suburban night. It was a heavy, pressurized silence. You know that ringing sound your ears make when there's no noise at all? It was like that, but amplified. It felt like the house had been vacuum sealed. I stood up, my joints feeling stiff and brittle. I walked to my bedroom door and opened it. "Guys?" I called. My voice didn't echo. It didn't even seem to leave my mouth, as if the air itself was too thick to carry sound. I walked into the living room. The party was gone. But it wasn't just that the people were gone. The party was gone. The red Solo cups, the half-eaten dip, the streamers Mike had hung from the ceiling fan, everything was missing. The room was perfectly, unnaturally clean. The furniture was polished, the pillows on the couch were fluffed, and the rug looked like it never been stepped on. "Sarah? Mike?" I went to their bedrooms. Both doors were open.
The beds were made with military precision. No clothes on the floor, no charging cables, no signs of life. A cold knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach. I looked at the thermostat on the wall. The digital display didn't show a temperature. It just showed 2 zeros. 0, 0. The neighborhood. I needed to see someone, anyone. I went to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The first thing I noticed was the sky. There were no stars, no moon. It wasn't even cloudy. It was just a flat, matte black expanse, as if the universe ended just above the rooftops. The second thing I noticed was the atmosphere. The air felt stagnant. It had the metallic, stale smell of an attic that hasn't been opened in decades. I looked down the street. Our neighborhood was a typical cul-de-sac. Usually, on New Year's, there would be cars parked along the curb, discarded fireworks casings in the gutters, and at least one neighbor's porch light flickering. Instead, every single house was dark. The streetlights were out. And then I saw them. In the yard directly opposite of mine, the Hendersons were standing. Mr. Henderson, his wife, and their 2 teenage sons. They weren't moving. They were standing in a perfect line on their lawn, dressed in their pajamas. They were all facing north. Their heads were tilted back at an uncomfortable angle, staring up at that empty black sky. "Mr. Henderson?" I called, my voice sounding thin and brittle. No response. I stepped off my porch, my feet crunching on the grass. The grass didn't feel like grass. It felt like dry straw snapping under my weight. I walked across the asphalt, which felt strangely soft, like walking on heavy curtains. I reached the edge of the Hendersons' lawn. I could see them clearly now in the ambient gloom. Mr. Henderson was a man I'd shared beers with over the fence. He was a guy who obsessed over his lawn and complained about the local sports team. Now, he looked like a wax figure. His skin was a pale, translucent gray. His eyes were wide open, unnaturally wide, but there were no pupils, just milky white orbs reflecting the nothingness above. I reached out and touched his arm. His skin was like ice. No, colder than ice. It felt like touching a piece of dry ice, a burn that went straight to the bone. And he was solid, not like a human being with muscles and blood, but like a statue carved from frozen meat. I backed away, a sob rising in my throat. I looked down the street. In every single yard, the story was the same. Every neighbor, every child, every dog, they were all standing outside, frozen, staring north. The hum. That's when the sound started. It began as a low-frequency vibration, more of a feeling in my teeth than a sound in my ears. It was a deep, tectonic hum that seemed to be coming from the ground beneath me and the sky above me at the same time. As the hum grew louder, the neighbors began to change. Their mouths, previously closed, began to drift open. They didn't scream, they didn't speak, they just opened their mouths wider and wider, far past the point of anatomical possibility, until their faces were dominated by dark, yawning voids. The vibration became so intense that I fell to my knees. The asphalt beneath me began to crack, but no dust rose from the fissures. I looked toward the north, where they were all staring. In the distance, past the tree line, something was rising. It wasn't a sun, it wasn't a firework. It was a shimmering, jagged tear in the darkness, a crack in the world. Through the crack, I could see glimpses of a place that made my brain ache, colors that didn't exist, shapes that defied geometry, and a sense of movement that suggested something massive was passing by on the other side. The new year. I saw the new passing by, a train of light and sound and life moving forward into time. And I was here, in the old. The hum shifted into a voice. It wasn't words, but a series of rhythmic pulses that translated directly into my mind. Left behind. The waste. The unwanted. The neighbors began to turn. Slowly, their frozen joints creaked like rusted hinges. One by one, their milky white eyes locked onto me. I was the only thing moving. I was the only thing that didn't belong in this graveyard of a year. Mr. Henderson, or the thing that looked like him, took a step, then another. He moved with a jerky, stop-motion gait. Behind him, his wife and sons followed. Down the street, dozens of others began to converge on my position. They weren't angry. There was no emotion on those distorted faces. There was just a terrible, hollow hunger. I was a spark of heat in a world of absolute zero, and they wanted the warmth. The return. I ran. I didn't go back to my house. I knew there was no safety there. I ran toward the north. If that crack in the sky was the doorway, I had to reach it. I had to jump through before it sealed shut. The hum became a roar. The wind picked up, a freezing gale that smelled of ozone and decay. I could hear the snapping of the statues behind me as they picked up speed, their frozen limbs breaking as they forced themselves to run. I reached the edge of the neighborhood where the woods began. The trees were black skeletons, their branches reaching out like claws. I scrambled through the underbrush, the thorns tearing at my scrubs, my breath coming in ragged, frozen gasps. The light was fading. The crack was closing. "Wait," I screamed, though I knew no one could hear me. I tripped over a root and tumbled down a small embankment. I landed hard, the air knocked out of me. As I struggled to sit up, I saw a hand reach out from the darkness. It was Mr. Henderson. He had caught up. His long, gray fingers wrapped around my ankle. The cold was so intense I felt my skin blister. He pulled me back toward the shadows. "No!" I kicked at him, but my foot just thudded against his chest like hitting a stone wall. More hands reached out from the trees. Pale, pupilless faces crowded around me. They began to lean in, their yawning mouths preparing to swallow the last of my warmth. I closed my eyes and prayed. I thought of my grandmother. I thought of her warning. The new year is a doorway. You have to walk through. With a final, desperate burst of energy, I lunged forward, not away from the hands, but toward the closing sliver of light in the sky. I felt a sensation of falling, not down, but out, like being spat out of a pressurized cabin. The morning after. I woke up with a gasp, bolting upright in my bed. Sunlight was streaming through the window, real, warm, golden sunlight. I could hear the sound of a snowblower down the street and the chirping of a few hardy winter birds. I was drenched in sweat, my heart racing at a dangerous pace. My room was messy. My clothes were on the floor. My phone was plugged in. I looked at the clock. 9:15 a.m., January 1st, 2024. I sat there for a long time, trembling. A dream, I told myself, a vivid, exhaustion-induced night terror. The brain does weird things when you're sleep-deprived. I walked out into the living room. Sarah and Mike were on the couch, surrounded by half-empty bags of chips and discarded party hats. They looked hungover and exhausted. "Morning, sleepyhead," Sarah groaned, shielding her eyes from the sun. "You missed a hell of a party. We tried to wake you up at midnight, but you were dead to the world. I think you even growled at Mike when he shook your shoulder." "Yeah," Mike added, rubbing his temples. "You were dead to the world, man. Happy New Year." I tried to laugh. I tried to join in the normalcy. "Happy New Year, guys." I went to the kitchen to make coffee. As I reached for a mug, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the microwave door. I looked pale, but okay. Then I felt a dull ache in my ankle. I pulled up the leg of my scrub pants. There, wrapped around my skin, was a bruise. It was dark purple, almost black. It wasn't a normal bruise from a fall. It was the distinct shape of a hand, 4 long finger marks and a thumb burned into my skin as if by extreme cold. I walked to the front window and looked across the street. Mr. Henderson was outside, clearing his driveway. He looked perfectly normal. He waved at me, a cheerful, neighborly gesture. But as he turned away, I noticed something. He was wearing a short-sleeved jacket, and on his forearm, visible for just a second, was a patch of skin that looked different. It was pale, translucent, and gray. He stopped for a moment, his head tilting back ever so slightly toward the north. I haven't slept well since then, and as the calendar turns closer to next December, the dread is returning. My grandmother was right about the doorway, but I don't think I made it all the way through. I think something from the old came back with me. Or maybe I'm still back there, and this world is the dream. Outro. There's something about the silence of a new year that always feels a bit haunting. If you've ever felt like you were the only person left in the world, tell me your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. You don't want to be left behind when the next video drops. This is Mr. Horror Man. Keep your eyes open, especially when the clock strikes 12. I'll see you in the next one. Story 3. The Passenger on Route 9. New Year's Eve is supposed to be about the future. Out with the old, in with the new. But in the rural parts of upstate New York, where the roads are narrow and the woods are thick, the old has a way of sticking around. It was approximately 1:45 a.m. on January 1st, 2024. I was driving home from my cousin's annual bash in a town called Oakhaven. I'd had a couple of beers early in the evening, but I'd stopped drinking by 10 p.m. and had spent the rest of the night pounding water and coffee. I felt sober, but I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that makes the edges of your vision go soft. To get home to my apartment in the city, I had two choices. Take the interstate, which was likely crawling with state troopers and holiday traffic, or take Route 9. Route 9 is one of those old back roads that doesn't see much maintenance. It's a winding, two-lane strip of asphalt that cuts through a valley, crossing over several creeks via old iron truss bridges. Most people avoid it at night because of the deer and the lack of cell service. But that night, I just wanted to be in my bed. I took the turnoff onto Route 9. The Woman in Gold. The weather was brutal. A wintry mix, the radio called it, halfway between snow and freezing rain. It coated the road in a layer of black ice that shimmered under my headlights like spilled oil. I was doing 30 miles per hour, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, squinting through the rhythmic slap of my windshield wipers. I was about 10 miles into the valley when my headlights caught something. At first, I thought it was a deer. Then, as I got closer, I thought it was a road sign that had been bent. But as the car slowed, the shape resolved into a person. She was standing on the narrow shoulder, right at the edge of a steep embankment that led down to a frozen creek. She was wearing a sleeveless, gold sequin party dress. It caught the light of my high beams, shimmering brilliantly against the dull gray of the sleet. She had no coat, no hat, no gloves. Her arms were bare, and her dark hair was matted to her forehead by the freezing rain. Every instinct I had screamed danger. You don't stop for hitchhikers at 2 a.m. on a deserted road. But this wasn't a hitchhiker. This was a girl who looked like she was going to die of hypothermia in minutes. I tapped the brakes, sliding slightly before the tires caught. I rolled down the passenger window just a crack. The cold air that rushed in was like a physical blow. "Hey!" I shouted over the wind. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman didn't turn her head. She just stood there, staring straight ahead at the dark woods across the road. She looked like she was in shock. I waited for a few seconds, my heart thumping. Finally, she turned. Her face was pale, not just cold pale, but a sickly translucent gray. She didn't say a word. She just walked toward the car and pulled the rear passenger door handle. It was locked. She stood there, waiting. I hesitated. I looked at the empty road ahead and the dark woods behind. "Screw it," I muttered. I hit the unlock button. She climbed into the back seat and closed the door with a soft thud. The silent ride. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. Usually, when a person gets into a warm car on a freezing night, you can feel the heat radiating off them as they thaw out. But when she sat down, the temperature in the car seemed to drop 20 degrees. My breath began to fog in the air in front of me. "Hey," I said, looking at her in the rearview mirror. "Where are you headed? Did your car break down?" She didn't look at me. She was staring out the side window. "Just ahead," she whispered. Her voice was the most unsettling part. It didn't sound like it came from her throat. It sounded like the friction of dry paper rubbing together. It was thin, airy, and lacked any inflection. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can take you to the gas station about 5 miles up. They'll have a phone and we can get you some blankets." She didn't respond. I put the car back in gear and started moving. As we drove, the silence in the car became oppressive. I tried to turn on the radio to break the tension, but all I got was static, a harsh, rhythmic white noise that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. I turned it off. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. She was sitting perfectly still. She wasn't shivering. That was the detail that started to really bother me. It was 10 degrees outside. She was soaked to the bone in a thin dress, and her body was as still as a statue. "So," I said, my voice sounding forced, "was it a good party, the one you were at?" I saw her eyes move in the mirror. They didn't lock onto mine. They seemed to be looking at something just behind my head. "He wouldn't stop," she whispered. "Who wouldn't stop? Your boyfriend? Did someone leave you out here?" "The lights," she said. "The lights didn't stop." I didn't know what to make of that. I figured she was drunk or high, or maybe she had a head injury from a crash I hadn't seen. I looked back at the road, focusing on a particularly sharp curve ahead that led to the Millers Creek Bridge, a narrow, rusted structure that spanned a 50-foot drop into a rocky gorge. The disappearance. As we approached the bridge, the sleet turned into a heavy, wet snow. The visibility dropped to almost zero. I slowed the car to a crawl. "We're almost to the bridge," I said, mostly to reassure myself. "Once we're across, it's only a few minutes to the station." I looked in the mirror again to see if she'd heard me. The back seat was empty. My foot hit the brake instinctively, the car fishtailed, the tires screeching on the ice as I spun 45 degrees, sliding toward the guardrail. I pumped the brakes, my heart in my throat, until the car finally came to a rattling halt, just inches from the rusted iron of the bridge entrance. I sat there for a second, gasping for air. Then I spun around in my seat. "Hey, where'd..." The back door was closed. The child locks were on. I always kept them on because of my nieces. There was no way she could have opened the door and jumped out while the car was moving, without me hearing the alarm or the wind. But she was gone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. I looked at the seat where she had been. The upholstery wasn't just damp, it was soaked. But it wasn't melted snow. A dark, thick, muddy liquid was pooling in the fabric. And then, the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of a girl who had been at a party. It was the scent of a stagnant pond. It was the scent of rotting vegetation, wet earth, and something metallic, like copper. It was the smell of a grave. I felt a wave of nausea. My hands began to shake so violently I could barely grip the wheel. She jumped out, I told myself. She's a ghost story, a prank, a hallucination. Just get across the bridge. Just get home. I shifted the car back in drive. My headlights cut through the snow, illuminating the entrance to the bridge. The hands. I started to roll forward, crossing onto the wooden planks of the bridge. The tires made a hollow drumming sound. Suddenly, the car's interior lights flickered. I looked up at the dome light, confused. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. She wasn't in the seat, but I saw her hands. 2 pale, bloated hands, the skin sloughing off in wet gray flakes, reached up from the floorboards behind my seat. They didn't have the delicate fingers of the girl I picked up. These were the hands of something that had been underwater for a long, long time. Before I could scream, the hands wrapped around my throat. The cold was unimaginable. It wasn't like ice. It was a dry, soul-sucking cold that seemed to drain the life right out of my skin. I tried to pull at the fingers, but they were like iron bands. Then a face rose up in the mirror, peering over my shoulder. It was the woman, but she was transformed. Her gold dress was shredded and covered in black silt. Her face was swollen, her eyes wide and bloodshot, staring at me with a look of absolute, unadulterated rage.
You didn't stop,
she whispered. Her grip tightened. I couldn't breathe. My vision began to tunnel. My foot convulsed on the gas pedal, and the car roared forward. We were heading straight for the side of the bridge. I didn't stop, I choked out, the words barely a whisper. I stopped. I picked you up. The car smashed through the wooden railing. The front wheels left the bridge, and for a split second, we were weightless, hanging over the dark void of the gorge. In that moment of weightlessness, the pressure on my neck vanished. The car's front end dropped, but the frame caught on a heavy structural beam of the bridge. The car tilted forward at a sickening 45-degree angle, dangling over the rocks below. I sat there, gasping, the seatbelt cutting into my chest. I looked in the mirror. Nothing. No hands, no woman. Just the empty, wet back seat and the smell of the swamp. The accident report. I was rescued 2 hours later by a snowplow driver who saw the hole in the bridge railing. They had to use the jaws of life to get me out. I told the police a deer had jumped out and I'd swerved. I didn't mention the woman. I didn't want to be sent to a psychiatric ward. But a few weeks later, I couldn't let it go. I went to the local library and looked through the archives of the Oak Haven Gazette. I found it on the front page of January 2nd, 2023. Local woman killed in New Year's Eve hit and run. Her name was Elena Vance. She was 22 years old. She had been leaving a party at 1:30 a.m. on January 1st. She had been wearing a gold sequined dress. According to the report, she had been walking along Route 9 after her car ran out of gas. A vehicle had struck her at high speed and dragged her body over the edge of the Millers Creek Bridge. The driver never stopped. The police found her body 3 days later in the frozen creek at the bottom of the gorge. The most chilling part of the article was the description of the evidence. The police had found a fragment of a headlight assembly at the scene. It belonged to a silver 2018 sedan. I drive a silver 2018 sedan. I bought it used in February of 2023. The dealer told me it had been refurbished after a minor fender bender by the previous owner. They never told me who the previous owner was. I sold that car the next day. But sometimes when I'm driving late at night, even in my new car, I look in the rearview mirror. I haven't seen her again. But every New Year's Eve at exactly 1:45 a.m., my phone gets a notification. No text, no call, just a location pin dropped on Route 9, right at the entrance of the Millers Creek Bridge. She's still waiting for the person who didn't stop, and she doesn't care if you're the one who was driving that night, or just the one driving the car. Outro. That's it for tonight's New Year's special. A huge thank you to Marcus for sharing that terrifying experience. If you've ever seen something on a lonely road that shouldn't be there, send your story to the email in the description. Don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Horror Man and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our first video of the new year. And do me a favor, if you see someone in a gold dress on the side of the road tonight, maybe just keep driving. I'm Mr. Horror Man, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe and Happy New Year, if you can. New Year's is a time for fresh starts, but for some, the past refuses to stay buried. If you have a story you'd like me to narrate, send it to the email in the description. Be safe out there tonight, and remember, the clock is always ticking. I'm Mr. Horror Man, and I'll see you in the next one. Sources.